horror story, The Ghostly Photo. Author Little Hack Bach. According to folklore, the lunar 7th month marks the beginning of the ghost month, a time filled with legends about ghosts, ominous energies, bad luck, and prohibitions in business and daily life. Legend has it that the 7th lunar month is particularly unlucky because the gates of hell open, allowing spirits to roam freely and disturb the living. From an unknown time, people have observed various taboos, avoiding business transactions, signing contracts, moving into new homes, and even going to hospitals to prevent spirits from dragging them down to hell. This belief stems from the notion that on the 15th day of the 7th month, all souls in the underworld, including deceased family members, are temporarily released from purgatory and allowed to visit the living. Therefore, families prepare elaborate offerings and ceremonies to appease their ancestors and seek blessings. Apart from ancestral rites on the Redemption of Souls Day, households also make offerings outside their homes to appease wandering spirits known as wandering souls. In addition to these rituals, folklore also dictates behaviors to observe and avoid during this period to ensure peace and happiness. One of the strict prohibitions is do not take photos during the lunar 7th month. Hey Trong, wait up, what's the rush? Hurry up, you slowpoke. Why are you crawling like a snail? Can't you put your phone down? Why take such creepy pictures? Hey, I take whatever I want. Why do you care? I'm not taking your picture, so relax. Tuyen ran up to where Trong was standing, still holding his touchscreen phone that his mother had bought him for his birthday last week. They were walking down a lane towards a friend's house when suddenly Trong noticed ahead of them a father and son from that house. The father was burning fake money, while the son sat nearby scattering rice and salt around the road. Trong turned to his friend and chuckled. Oh, I almost forgot. It's almost the 15th day of the 7th lunar month. Have you bought offerings for your family? Are you going to scatter money too? I need to get ready with my badminton racket just in case. I don't know yet. Let's go there and I'll tell you. These guys always seem so eager for money, don't they? Tuyen replied while simultaneously opening the camera to record a video of what lay ahead. In an instant, he slightly startled, hesitating momentarily before the curiosity of his friend. This was because right where the father and son had been worshiping, there were now 3 figures dressed in immaculate white clothes, their faces dark and obscured, hunched over the incense sticks planted on the ground. Seeing this, he immediately pointed over and said hesitantly, Trong, where did those 3 people come from? I don't remember seeing anyone around here just a moment ago. Upon hearing this, Trong also turned his gaze in the direction indicated by his friend's outstretched arm. He too saw the 3 figures with disheveled hair sitting there, their heads bowed slightly towards the ground. He thought his friend might be scared of encountering ghosts, especially since it was already past 8 p.m. and there wasn't a single person passing through the alley at this hour. Realizing that the 3 figures were probably not ghosts, Trong patted Tuyen on the shoulder and chuckled before saying, Ha! You're such a joke thinking those 3 are ghosts, huh? Can't you see they're just sitting there, touching the ground? You've been watching too many ghost movies and got haunted. But hey, they do look like wandering spirits in those clothes. Let me ask them where they got those outfits from. Maybe I'll buy some for the kids in the neighborhood for fun. After saying this, Trong cheerfully walked up to where the 3 figures in white were sitting with their backs turned. Tuyen hesitated for a moment upon hearing his friend's words, but eventually followed along behind. As Trong approached closer behind the 3 figures, he noticed a cluster of lychee fruit and 2 fresh sugarcane sticks nearby. He bent down, picked them up, and awkwardly asked, Ha! Hi there, it's just the beginning of the ghost month. Why are you eager for offerings so early? And you're dressed all in white, looking quite authentic." Upon hearing him speak, the three figures slowly raised their heads, their faces cold, lifeless, and expressionless. This involuntary reaction sent a chill down his spine, but because there was a streetlight illuminating the alley, he quickly regained his composure and turned back to Tuyen, who had just arrived beside him. "Hey, look again. These three are dressed up so convincingly. It'd be a breeze to scare the spirits away wearing these outfits during the night. Everyone would think they're ghosts and run off, leaving the offerings behind for us. Let's grab 2 sets right away, haha." Tuyen observed the three individuals cautiously, and upon examining the ground, he felt assured they were real people. He followed Trong's lead and approached them, saying, "Hey there, where did you get these outfits? Show us where to get them, and if we scare away the ghosts, we'll call each other for fun. We'll split everything evenly among the 5 of us." Seeing that the three remained silent and didn't respond, Trong and Tuyen felt their strange demeanor and unfriendly attitude, so they decided not to engage further and hurriedly pulled their friend away, not looking back again. At that moment, behind them, the 3 white-clad figures glanced up, their mouths forming eerie smiles before gradually disappearing into the undefined space. By the time they reached their friend's house, it was past 9 p.m. After an hour of conversation, the 3 friends made plans for a trip to Kanjio the next day. Initially, Tree's mother objected, knowing it was the lunar 7th month, not an auspicious time for outings and gatherings. However, after much pleading and promises, she reluctantly agreed to let her son go. Everyone was pleased and agreed to meet early the next morning at Tuyen's house, located at the intersection of the main road for convenience. After exchanging a few more words, the 3 bid farewell and left. Trong and Tuyen walked back through the old alley towards their homes. Checking the time, it was already 10 p.m., and the houses along the street were dark and quiet, except for the faint sounds of insects buzzing in the branches and the chilly breeze blowing through. As they walked, Trong suddenly picked up his pace, afraid of being scolded by his mother for coming home late. Tuyen followed suit. Just as they were about to exit the alley, Trong felt dirt hitting his back. He stopped abruptly and exclaimed, "Oh damn, who's playing this rude game?" As he asked, he brushed off the sand and dirt from his back. Under the dim light of the street lamp, he noticed Tuyen's hands were clean and didn't have any dirt on them. He angrily glanced around, but saw no one in sight. Convinced it was some mischievous folks hiding in the nearby houses, he gritted his teeth and cursed loudly, intending for the mysterious figures to hear him. "You guys, don't let me catch you hanging around this alley again. Got it? Playing such rude games," Trong shouted angrily. Standing beside his friend from start to finish, Tuyen didn't understand whom Trong was scolding or why, as he saw no dirt on his friend's back. He was about to ask when Trong suddenly turned and ran off. Perplexed by his friend's strange behavior, Tuyen couldn't help but wonder. Suddenly, thunder rumbled in the sky, making him startle and shake his head to clear the recent incident. He hurriedly ran home, leaving behind the eerie white figures that once again appeared clapping hands and laughing ominously across the alley. Later that night, after cleaning up, Tuyen returned to his room and started browsing news and reviewing the photos and videos he had taken earlier. Halfway through a clip, he noticed something peculiar. He rewound it, eyebrows furrowing in concentration. In the video, he was surprised not to see the 3 individuals sitting where they had been during the evening ritual. Perplexed, he replayed the footage several times, certain he had captured their presence earlier. Perplexed, he called Trong to inform him. Unable to find an explanation for this strangeness, he eventually turned off his phone and went to bed. In the dimness of his room in the middle of the night, he faintly heard strange sounds, resembling cries for help and sobbing, echoing around him, sometimes nearby, sometimes far away, the direction indiscernible. The next morning, as dawn broke, Tuyen saw Trong pull up in his Honda in front of his house. He cheerfully opened the door and invited his friend in to wait for Tree to arrive. They sat on the stone bench in the front yard, chatting for nearly half an hour, waiting for Tri. Seeing no sign of him, Trong grew impatient and was about to call when suddenly, from a distance, they heard their friend's familiar voice. "Hey guys, I'm here. Ready to go?" "You lazy bum, we planned for 5 a.m. and you show up close to 6? Were you taking forever to pee or something?" "Haha, pee? No way. Granny insisted I eat breakfast before I left. She's afraid I'll go hungry on the way. Geez, your mom worries too much, as if your family just moved to Saigon for the first time. Anyway, let's hurry up, it's getting late and the sun's already rising." That's just how Tri was, always laid back and slow-paced. "Hey Trong, no change. Tri is always the latest to arrive on trips or drinking sessions, and he always brings with him so many reasons that no one can predict," Trong grumbled. All three of them were now getting on their motorbikes, ready to depart. Trong was always the one in control at the handlebars, while Tuyen, always nervous, sat behind. Trong had a very strong and assertive personality. If he wasn't driving, everyone would panic and veer off the road to avoid him. Many times, sitting behind him, even just watching him maneuver like that, Tuyen's heart would race. Yet, looking at Tri, it wasn't much different from Trong. The two were known as the kings of the road throughout Saigon. At this point, all three were entering the Kanjio district, where the beauty of untouched nature converged: sea, river, and lush forests. With its dense network of rivers and canals, Kanjio was completely isolated. This place offered plenty of interesting things to explore, perfect for young outings. Feeling they had more time than planned before departure, the three young men, aged around 22-23, were still full of energy. So upon arrival, their first stop was Monkey Island, a familiar and popular destination known for its mild and pleasant climate. "Hey Tuyen, what's in that big bag?" Trong asked. "Haha, 2 bunches of bananas, bro. We'll feed the monkeys too," Tuyen replied. "Wow, Tuyen, you're something else. I thought you bought something else, but turns out it's bananas for the monkeys. Come on, give me one to try." Tri chimed in. While waiting for the ferry to take them to the island, the three sat on their bikes, admiring the river scenery and chatting. Trong rummaged in the bag and pulled out a rather large, ripe yellow banana. Without hesitation, he peeled it and started munching away. Tri, curious about the taste, followed suit and took one to try. Shortly after, the ferry arrived and took the three and a few other volunteer groups across. Upon arriving at the island, they were greeted by a group of dozens of monkeys, sitting and waiting, casting wary glances at the strangers entering their secluded world. After some playful interaction and feeding the monkeys, the three continued deeper into the island to explore. They walked along a path lined with thick green trees, forming a canopy that shaded them from the sunlight, creating a cool and slightly chilly atmosphere. As they ventured further, the three suddenly felt something very strange. There were no people around them, not even monkeys. Just as Trong was about to call everyone to turn back, Tuyen spoke up and stopped them. "Wait a moment, let me take some photos and shoot a video first," Tuyen said. As he spoke, he pulled out his phone, unlocking the screen to begin his task. Trong and Tri, knowing Tuyen's passion for photography, didn't object and simply wandered around, waiting. Tuyen was fascinated by the pristine scenery around him. When he aimed his camera towards a small pond, suddenly he hesitated, tilting his head forward but seeing nothing unusual. Checking his phone again, the two white shadows appeared once more, hovering above the pond. Tuyen rubbed his eyes in confusion, thinking the sunlight had blurred his vision, but upon closer inspection, the two white figures had completely vanished. He breathed a sigh of relief, patting his chest to calm his nerves. Meanwhile, Trong and Tree noticed their friend's strange behavior and walked over to shake his shoulders, asking, "Hey, have you finished shooting? Let's go quickly. It's about to rain." Hearing their voices, Tyne snapped out of his trance, turning to look at his friends and shaking his head dismissively. "No, it's nothing. Let's hurry up, guys." After a while, they stopped at a roadside eatery because it was nearly noon and dark clouds covered the sky, hinting at an imminent downpour. After their meal, a heavy rain poured down. Trong and Tree grumbled, looking outside, and then heading towards a row of houses with stretched hammocks hanging at either end of the poles, where they laid down to wait. Tuyen remained seated, scrolling through his phone to review the footage from earlier. Finding everything normal in the photos, he thought his eyes must have played tricks on him, and quickly brushed off the incident, walking over to where his friends were resting on the hammocks. An hour later, when the rain subsided, the three continued their journey. Their next destination was the Haithan Temple, renowned within the town area. While exploring, Tuyen eagerly took out his phone to take photos when a man's voice interrupted him. "Hey kid, don't take photos here. If you want to take pictures, do it outside," the man said firmly. Hearing this, Tuyen turned to see a middle-aged man, around 46 or 47 years old, dressed in worn-out clothes of short stature and clearly irritated by his actions, thus reminding him in a stern manner. Tuyen didn't realize his lack of courtesy and, together with his two friends, stared blankly at the man. Ignoring the comment, Tuyen continued to casually use his phone to capture images throughout the temple. Seeing Tuyen's uncooperative attitude, the man frowned and stepped forward, giving Tuyen a strong tap on the shoulder and pointing his finger as he spoke. "Please understand, this place is sacred. It's not appropriate to take photos here. Besides, it's the 7th lunar month. You shouldn't take photos indiscriminately like that. You might invite trouble upon yourself. I advise you to listen." The old man's reproachful words left Tuyen feeling not only unintentionally disrespectful, but also embarrassed, prompting Trong and Tree to mock him for being overly cautious due to his age, despite all three being unaware that the old man was the guardian of the temple. After a brief argument, seeing that more people were gathering around to eavesdrop, Tuyen felt that continuing the debate was futile. He turned away and pulled his two friends from the area, disregarding the elderly man who watched the young men leave with a shake of his head. As they walked, Tuyen brooded over the encounter with the old man, visibly annoyed. He complained to his friends, "Damn it, once in a while we come to play here and we encounter some grumpy old man like that. Totally kills the mood. Forget about him. Let's just enjoy ourselves. Maybe next time I'll find a cute girl to introduce to you. You're over 20 and still single. Watch out for becoming a spinster," Try teased. "Humph. I don't care if I stay single. Why are you laughing? I'm just not ready," Tuyen retorted. Their banter helped Tuyen ease some of his frustration. After driving a bit further, they stopped and discussed among themselves, deciding to camp overnight on a small island outside Than An town. Upon arrival, they were captivated by the scenery and the cool weather following the noon rain. This place was ideal for those who enjoyed a simple life amidst the rivers and nature's tranquility. Being an undeveloped island, life here posed numerous challenges due to its geographical isolation. The island's impoverished residents relied heavily on fishing, salt production, and forest care for their livelihoods. Their first task was to rent a tent for accommodation. Afterwards, they explored the island, taking photos and enjoying meals as souvenirs. During this time, they encountered something that surprised them. some residents of the island were setting up offerings and altars, lighting incense and praying. It was a rare sight for the three friends, who were more accustomed to city life, but they understood that each place had its own customs and traditions, so they didn't find it too unusual. While sitting near a seafood stall waiting for their food to be prepared, Tuyen became curious and took out his phone to capture a photo of a woman kneeling before an altar not far from where he stood. He adjusted the angle for a better shot when suddenly the woman turned her head and looked directly at him. Tuyen was startled and almost dropped his phone. The woman stared at him for a few seconds before abruptly making a strange gesture that sent shivers down his spine. "Hey, Tuyen, hurry up. We've got the bait here." "Huh? Why do you look so pale? Feeling dizzy? Turn your face towards me. Let me see if anything's wrong." As Tree asked and pulled Tuyen's shoulder to face him, he noticed the unsettled look still lingering in his friend's eyes, as if he had just witnessed something terrifying. Trong's voice interrupted them impatiently. "You two, hurry up and come here. Don't make me carry these 2 crates of beer myself. And you're still standing there." "Okay, got it. Wait a moment. Hey, Tuyen, move it." Tuyen gathered his thoughts only now, visibly shaken by Tree's puzzling behavior, but he simply thought his friend wasn't feeling well. The trio continued wandering to buy more supplies before returning to their tent for some drinks. As night fell, the sea breeze brought a chill that deepened with each passing moment, accompanied by the salty taste lingering on their tongues. While enjoying their drinks, Tuyen recalled the temple guard's warning earlier that day with disdain. "Just thinking about it makes me irritated. What's wrong with that old man to be so grumpy towards me? It's not like I was disrespecting him. Anyone would take a photo. He didn't say not to take pictures, just to be careful. The more I think about it, the more annoyed I get. Look at his face, so stern. I don't like him." "Forget about it while we're having fun. What does that old man matter? Let it go," Trong added. "Oh yeah, speaking of which, my parents also say the same thing. During the ghost month, you have to be careful with everything, or you might run into trouble. Especially with ghosts and demons on the streets. If you're not careful, they might latch onto you," Tri warned. Trong chuckled, wondering if Tree was intentionally trying to scare Tuyen and him. He laughed mockingly at his friend, lifted his beer glass, and drained it in one go, finding that the cooler was empty. He stood up to buy more ice, and Tuyen followed from behind with a flashlight, leaving Tri alone in the tent, scrolling on his phone and waiting. As they stepped outside, they immediately felt the cold sea breeze blowing against them, making them shiver. Instinctively, they rubbed their hands together for warmth and huddled closer. There were barely any streetlights around, just the moonlight illuminating the ethereal space. Being on a remote island meant there were many deficiencies. It was exceptionally quiet at night. Although uncertain if any shops were still open, Trong and Tuyen confidently used their flashlights to light their way ahead. As they walked, they didn't see anyone around, despite it only being 8 p.m. Apart from the sound of their footsteps, there were faint footsteps trailing from behind. Tuyen sensed someone walking the same path as them, judging from their shadows cast ahead on the road. Along with a sudden cold breeze brushing against him, he instinctively grabbed Trong's hand to step aside, allowing people behind them to pass. Curious to see who they were, Tuyen wanted to turn around but hesitated due to unease. Trong, walking beside him, noticed his friend's anxious movements. Instead of asking questions, he turned around and looked. He was slightly startled to see 3 figures walking behind them, dressed entirely in white from head to toe. One of them he recognized as the person he saw the other day on the way to Tri's house. It struck him as odd why they would dress so strangely and wander around this island at this hour, especially since the locals had already closed up for the night. Who else would be performing rituals? Yet, being mischievous by nature and enjoying teasing others, Trong shrugged off the strange attire. Hey, look who we've run into again. What a coincidence! Tuyen continued to walk slowly, waiting for the three individuals to pass ahead, when suddenly he heard his friend greeting someone, prompting him to turn around curiously. Recognizing the three people from the other day, he felt somewhat relieved. Both Tuyen and Trong paused courteously to greet them, feeling slightly less anxious now that there were others on the path with them. In a flash, Trong forgot about the mysterious disappearance of his photograph of the three individuals. Hey, greetings, fellow campers. Bringing disguises for camping, huh? But at this hour, there's no one left to perform rituals for the ghost month. Where are you camping? Or are you joining us for a drink together? Maybe we could form a group for some fun. Who knows? We might hit it off. Goodness, this guy. Why talk about forming a ghost hunting group? Forget him. He's drunk, so he's talking nonsense. But why are you dressed so strangely? Aren't you afraid of encountering ghosts at night? Upon hearing this, the three individuals exchanged glances but didn't respond. Their expressions remained grim and cold as they looked at Trong and Tuyen. Suddenly, one of them spoke in a deep, resonant voice. Hey, we're not who you think we are. Can't you recognize us? Both Trong and Tuyen felt goosebumps rising on their skin upon hearing the eerie voice, yet they couldn't believe they were conversing with spirits. Instinctively, Trong chuckled with amusement, draped his arm around his friend's shoulder, and said, Hey, this guy's joking around. But during the ghost month, let's not talk nonsense. It could bring bad luck. Anyway, we'll catch up later. We're off to buy some stuff for our drink. Bye. With that, Trong urged his friend to hurry, fearing that Tree was waiting impatiently. After half an hour of finding no one else around to buy from, the two reluctantly returned to their tent. Upon arriving, they couldn't find Tree anywhere. They scattered around to search, and eventually, Trong discovered his friend lying unconscious under a coconut tree not far from the tent. After carrying Tree back inside and trying everything, he finally regained consciousness, but remained deeply confused and frightened. Trong repeatedly clapped his hands on his friend's face and said, Hey, are you awake now? Didn't drink that much, but ended up lying unconscious on the street? Are you awake now? Despite Trong's scolding, which was somewhat justified since Tree was known for attending drinking parties, but usually kept his alcohol intake within limits, enjoying a few drinks only when in the mood. It was unusual for him to be so intoxicated that he ended up sprawled under a coconut tree like this. This puzzled Trong and Tuyen throughout their drinking session until now. Hey guys, there are ghosts here. I just got scared out of my wits. I'm so scared that I ran out of the tent to find you. Maybe we should move somewhere else. It's too creepy here. If the ghost comes back, I might stop breathing altogether. Both of them listened to their friend mentioning ghosts, feeling half skeptical and half unsure. They exchanged bewildered looks. After a few moments of silence, Tuyen spoke up. You're saying there are ghosts here? What did it look like? Do you remember? Tell us. Tree couldn't hide his fear and anxiety. His eyes darted around nervously, wary of the ghost returning to frighten him again. Once he felt a bit calmer, he recounted the chilling experience, still shaken and apprehensive. Meanwhile, after Trong and Tuyen had been gone for a while, Tree was left alone in the tent, feeling tired and waiting. He was just about to lie down and rest for a bit when suddenly, from outside, he heard footsteps crunching on the sand and sand being thrown onto the tent. Startled awake, he initially thought his friends were playing a prank on him. Squinting to clear his vision, Tree grabbed a flashlight and stepped outside, wanting to catch his friends in the act of mischief. Ha ha, you two ghosts think you can scare me? Don't even try. I know you're out here. Come on out, stop messing around. But as he looked around outside the tent, Tree couldn't see his two friends anywhere. Moments of confusion and thought passed. Then he heard footsteps approaching slowly from behind, getting closer each time. Frowning slightly, he turned around to look. Before him, two figures dressed in white slowly approached where he stood, their heads bowed as if not wanting Tree to see their faces. Sigh, you two ghosts, what took you so long? Oh, where did you find those two white outfits? Trying to scare me, huh? Let me tell you, I'm not scared at all. You guys are crazy. The two figures remained silent upon hearing him speak, continuing to advance slowly. At that moment, Tree didn't think much of it, convinced that his friends were intentionally trying to scare him for fun. He chuckled and scooped up a handful of sand, throwing it towards the two figures, laughing to himself. Despite this, they continued walking until they were about 2 arms lengths away from Tree. It was only then that he truly noticed something unusual. His hands trembled as he pointed the flashlight directly at their faces. One of them slowly lifted their head to look at him. In an instant, Tree was speechless, his eyes wide in shock as he saw a half-grotesque face revealed in the darkness. Their eyes glowed with a greenish light, and their mouth opened eerily as they spoke in a chilling voice. "Come on, follow us. This place is fun. Hurry up." Faced with the unimaginable ghostly figure, Tree stumbled backward and suddenly sprinted, desperate to escape the terrifying presence. As he ran, he could hear faint laughter echoing around him, haunting and unsettling, seeping into his ears. Eventually, he found himself back at the coconut tree, leaning against its trunk, panting heavily from exhaustion. Unexpectedly, he heard faint moans echoing around, his body drenched in sweat. Panicked, he turned his head in all directions until he felt something disturbing descending from above. Instinctively, he raised his hand to touch his own head, then slowly lowered it, startled by a low growl resonating from above the tree. He jerked his head upwards, only to see a horrifying sight: a man with a pale, ghastly face, wrinkled skin, white hair, and blood dripping from his mouth, hovering over him where he sat. Overwhelmed with fear, he tried to scream for help, but no sound came out before he quickly lost consciousness. After hearing Tree's story, Trong and Tuin exchanged amused glances, thinking he must have been drunk, appearing disoriented and ridiculous. Trong noticed the remaining food and drinks and was initially inclined to discard them, but hesitated, feeling it would be wasteful. He looked at his two friends and remarked, "Forget about ghosts, what nonsense. If you're scared, go to sleep first. Tuin and I will continue drinking. There's still plenty of beer left over there, let's not waste it." Huh? Are we ending the drinking session already? No ice to chill the drinks? Yeah, we're ending it. No point in dragging it out. Finish up and go to sleep. We can head back tomorrow noon. What's there to worry about? Okay, fine. Let's finish this then. Tree, you go to bed first. We'll handle the drinking. With that settled, both returned to their drinking, while Tree still couldn't shake off his lingering fear, hastily lying down and covering himself with a jacket to try and sleep, hoping to forget the haunting experience. Meanwhile, Trong and Tuin continued drinking, quickly finishing off one can after another. Before long, both their minds became muddled and indistinct, the remaining beer cans dwindling rapidly. Tuin hiccuped and looked at Trong, saying, "All right, I've had enough. I can't handle anymore. Let's clear this mess outside and call it a night. Leave the beer. We'll take it back to Saigon for later," Trong suggested. Agreeing, Trong stood up to help clear away the food and drinks from outside the tent. As he finished up, feeling a bit tipsy, he suddenly felt the urge to relieve himself. He dashed over to a narrow corner near a local's house and hurriedly unzipped his pants to relieve himself. Just as he began, he noticed a wide gap in the wall large enough for an adult's hand. To his shock, he saw a person dressed entirely in white staring intently at him. Despite his slightly inebriated state, Trong could discern the person's pale, hairless face with sharp, menacing teeth. Squinting to get a better look in the dim moonlight, Trong raised his voice in a casual tone. "Hey, are you guys in the white shirts? Playing hide and seek here in the open? Come out later, huh?" As the figure in white continued to approach without acknowledging his words, Trong spoke again. "All right, never mind. Not playing around, huh? You're quite peculiar." With that, Trong quickly pulled up his pants and stumbled back towards the tent, swaying unsteadily. He ignored the figure, still poking its head out of the gap in the wall, observing his every move. Back inside the tent, Trong warily prepared to lie down and sleep, but noticed Tuin sitting, staring intently at his touchscreen phone. Tuin's complexion appeared slightly pale, as if he had just seen something extremely disturbing. Startled by the noise, Trong turned to look at him, contemplating for a moment before reaching out to call his friend and inquire. "Trong, come here and check this picture out. Something strange about it." Despite feeling extremely drowsy, Trong was intrigued by Tuin's words and crawled over to take the phone from him. As he looked at the image, Tuin continued, "Look closely. Is there anyone in this photo? I took a snap of those 3 people we saw earlier outside. Why aren't they in the picture now? This is messed up. Could it be? Trong, did we encounter ghosts?" Without responding, Trong carefully examined the photo, trying to verify if the 3 people Tuin mentioned were indeed present. Recalling the events, he reviewed his photo album once again, comparing it with the images of the 3 individuals he encountered earlier in the city. Within moments, he couldn't spot anyone in white attire in the photo, not even in the video footage he had viewed earlier. Lost in contemplation, Trong still couldn't fully accept that he had encountered ghosts. Seeing nothing unusual in the ordinary photo, he sighed warily and scratched his head, responding to Tuin. "I didn't see anyone in there. What are you talking about? And those 3 people you mentioned? Why would you suddenly take pictures of others, huh? Ghosts? You're the one who seems like a ghost right now, drunk and talking nonsense. Go to sleep," Trong retorted. He crawled back near where Tree was sound asleep, laid down, feeling a bit dizzy from the alcohol and exhausted. Within the tranquil silence of the night, except for the sound of the waves lapping the shore, unexpectedly, a faint, eerie voice echoed inside the tent. The sound startled Trong awake. He squinted his eyes to see who was speaking, and upon seeing, he was about to sit up in alarm. However, his body suddenly stiffened, unable to move. Confused and frightened, his lips trembled, wanting to scream, but his voice failed him. Before him, sitting on either side were Tuin and Tree, except their faces had suddenly contorted, cracked like those of drowned corpses. Both stared intently at him, speaking with twisted smiles that were unsettling. Minutes later, they began nodding their heads back and forth, slowly bending down closer to his face. Heart racing, breath erratic with fear, Trong squeezed his eyes shut, not wanting to see that horrifying sight anymore. Abruptly, the eerie murmurs from Tuin and Tree ceased. They began to pull him up forcefully. Realizing his friends were possibly possessed by spirits, he struggled desperately, shouting as loud as he could. However, the more he resisted, the faster they dragged him. In a state of panic and despair, Tree suddenly looked at him, a viscous, black, foul-smelling substance dripping from his mouth, and spoke. "Aren't you coming with us? We're here to take you. Hurry up." Hearing this, tears streamed down Trong's face. His nose was running, and he continuously pleaded for his friends to release him, but all he received in response were sinister, echoing laughs. Just as he was being dragged out of the tent's entrance, Trong suddenly woke up with a loud gasp, sitting upright. Tears flowed down his face, and Tuan and Tree looked at him with concern, watching closely. Seeing that he had regained consciousness, Tree anxiously asked, "Hey, what happened? You were sleeping soundly, then suddenly screamed like that. Your hand even hit my face, you know? What weird dreams are you having?" Tuan, sitting nearby, nodded along with Tree's words, observing Trung's bewildered state. Waiting for him to calm down, Tuan and Tree leaned in to inquire about his experience, and Trung began recounting the terrifying nightmare he had just had. Finished with his story, Trung looked around the tent nervously and hesitantly turned to Tree. "Hey Tree, could it be that what I dreamt about was real? Were those ghosts?" Both listened to him in silence, their faces pale with the memory of Trung's recent nightmare. Each had experienced their own supernatural events and pieced them together. They decided it was best to leave as soon as possible, even though it was only 5 a.m. outside. After packing up everything, they contacted the tent rental service to return it and immediately rushed to the dock to wait for the ferry. It took nearly 2 hours for all three of them to board the ferry back to the mainland. Once there, they hurriedly got into a taxi to return to Saigon, no longer in the mood for any leisure activities. Since returning to Saigon, everything seemed to return to normal until one night at Tuan's house. As he turned off the lights and climbed into bed, he suddenly felt someone's hand grasp his leg, mistaking it for the house cat jumping onto the bed. Startled, he sat up to shoo the cat away, but there was no cat to be found. As he was about to lie back down, he heard a faint whispering outside his door. Glancing at the clock, he saw it was past 10 p.m. and his alley was deserted, especially now nearing midnight. Standing still, he strained to hear the conversation outside his door, but couldn't make out what was being said. Too curious to resist, he decided to open the balcony door and look down to see who it was. However, as he peered out into the moonlit courtyard below, he froze in shock. 3 figures dressed in pristine white were sitting perched on the wrought iron fence of his house. Realizing what he had just seen, his legs trembling, he tried to retreat backward to avoid their gaze. Before he could draw the curtains closed, the 3 eerie figures suddenly leaped up, hovering in midair. Their eyes glowed with an eerie green light as they smiled and spoke. "You saw us, so why run away now? Come with us, it's fun here, hey!" Before finishing their sentence, one of the 3 ghostly figures extended a long, twisted arm through the window pane, attempting to pull him outside. Horrified, he screamed loudly and dashed away. "Ghost! Ghost! Help!" In the room next door, Mr. and Mrs. Ngoc were jolted awake by their son's screams, rushing out to see what had happened. They found Tuan crouched in a corner by the stairs, visibly shaken. Mrs. Ngoc approached him with concern, asking what had occurred. "Tuan, what's going on? Why are you sitting here on the stairs at this hour? Tell me what happened," Mrs. Ngoc asked with concern. "Oh, Dad, how can he speak clearly if he's so upset? Let him calm down first," Mr. Ngoc intervened calmly. After a while, Tuan gradually regained his composure and nervously recounted everything that had just happened in his room to his parents. Mrs. Ngoc trembled after hearing it and turned to her husband. "Oh my, what is happening? Did you do something wrong outside that would cause someone to haunt our house like this?" she exclaimed. "What's wrong with you? Always thinking about such things? We regularly worship at home, don't we? Who would follow us?" Mr. Ngoc responded defensively. "And Tuan, did you offend someone while you were out? Tell us the truth so your mom and I can figure this out." Listening to his parents' words of encouragement and advice, Tuan nervously tried to recall the events that had unfolded earlier. A few minutes later, as if remembering something important, he spoke up hesitantly. "Oh, I remember now." As he said this, he hesitated, turning his head towards the door of his room. He swallowed nervously, hesitant because he had left his phone inside and was afraid to go back in alone, fearing those three eerie figures might still be waiting. If he called his parents in, he was afraid Mrs. Van would scold him for being timid. Sensing her son's fear, Mrs. Ngoc quickly stepped in. "Let me go with him to talk in his room. What's the point of standing out here? Come on," she urged her husband. The three of them stood up and walked into Tuan's room, where everything appeared normal. Tuan nervously grabbed his phone and opened the photos and videos he had taken earlier. In an instant, his heart raced, his eyes widened in disbelief, his mouth gaped open, and his trembling hands almost dropped the phone to the ground. He saw the pictures of the shrine where three figures dressed in immaculate white robes were hovering above the ground, their pale faces grotesquely distorted, twisted to face him. What horrified him even more was that neither he nor his two friends had seen anything like that before. Mr. Fan noticed the pale, shocked expression on his son's face and anxiously snatched the phone to look. Like Tuan, his father's face suddenly drained of color, sweat breaking out on his temples. A few minutes later, trembling, he handed the phone to his wife to see. Mrs. Ngoc gasped in horror, causing Mr. Fan to startle and quickly cover her mouth to avoid alarming the neighbors, especially since it was just past 11 at night. After a while, Mrs. Ngoc decided to delete all the terrifying ghostly images from the phone and planned to take Tuan to consult a fortune teller the next day, someone she knew who was also knowledgeable about rituals to dispel evil spirits. Feeling somewhat reassured, Mr. and Mrs. Ngoc returned to their room, but Tuan, still uneasy, followed them closely. He decided to sleep with his parents that night to ease his fear. From that moment on, nothing else happened. Tuan lay awake for a few restless minutes, but exhaustion soon took over, his eyes growing heavy, and he drifted off to sleep unknowingly. Meanwhile, at Trong's home, there was a small celebration because his mother had recently won the lottery. Although modest, it was considered quite lucky, so they prepared a relatively elaborate meal for the family to enjoy, including Trong, his younger brother, grandparents, and mother. Trong's father was away on business, transporting goods for distribution to the provinces in the Mekong Delta, visiting his family only once every few days. By the time the family dinner ended around 10 in the evening, everyone retired to their respective rooms to sleep. Trong, however, stayed awake. He quietly slipped out of the house and sat on a stone bench near the door to smoke. The late night was eerily quiet, with nearly all the neighboring houses dark and silent, except for occasional barking from a dog somewhere down the alley. As Trong smoked half a cigarette, he suddenly noticed a dark figure outside the corrugated iron roof of his house, moving slowly forward. Its head was slightly bowed, as if avoiding his gaze. The figure passed by the gate of his house without looking up or making any sound of footsteps, not even the slightest noise. Feeling somewhat unusual about the figure, Trong decided it wasn't worth worrying about and continued smoking while scrolling through his phone. A few minutes later, he once again noticed a dark figure slowly passing by his house. Intrigued and a bit uneasy, he pondered for a few seconds before deciding to quietly follow to see who was behaving so strangely. Waiting for the shadow to glide past his gate, he swiftly stood up and opened the door to observe. As he moved closer, he realized that the distance between him and the dark figure was gradually closing, despite him only walking and not chasing after it. When the gap between them narrowed to just a couple of steps, the dark figure suddenly halted and didn't move any further. Trong, feeling anxious, stared intently at the person. Despite his fear, he tried to appear calm and slowly approached to get a closer look. As he glanced at the figure's face, his own drained of color, and in panic, he screamed and turned to run. However, when he looked back at the path he had taken, he realized he had wandered far from his home without realizing it. He found himself standing in a smelly garbage dump, trying to cover his nose and mouth to avoid the stench. Struggling to move forward, his feet seemed unnaturally rooted to the spot. Suddenly, the dark figure turned its head back, its pale, grotesque face still intact, and its haunting voice chuckled. "Hey, hey, why are you following me?" Trunk's heart pounded in his chest as he fell to the ground in terror, attempting to escape. The ghostly figure wasted no time, extending its long, slender arms to grab Trung by the ankle and swiftly dragging him into the thick bushes nearby the trash dump. The next morning, Tuan and his mother visited the house of Mr. Fung, a fortune teller located near a small bridge across a canal surrounded by dense trees. Upon arrival, they found several people waiting their turn. Tuan and his mother patiently sat down until noon approached, and it was nearly their turn. Mr. Fung, looking exhausted, stood up and addressed everyone. "Please go have lunch and come back this afternoon. I'll continue then. Thank you for your understanding." Concerned, Mrs. Ngok looked at Mr. Fung, while those who had come later reluctantly left. Once everyone had cleared out, Mrs. Ngok approached Mr. Fung despite objections from her daughter-in-law and son. "Mr. Fung, it's me. I have something I need your help with, please." "Oh, it's you, Mrs. Ngok. What's the urgent matter?" As Mr. Fung walked slowly back to Mrs. Ngok and her son, he noticed Tuan's pallid complexion and slight darkness around his face. His expression changed slightly, and he sighed, inviting them to sit back down. Taking out a tortoise shell with 3 coins inside, he closed his eyes and shook it repeatedly. After a few moments, he carefully scattered the coins and observed them closely before sighing again and addressing Mrs. Ngok. "Sigh. Your son has offended a spirit, and now they're after him. As for how he offended them, ask him directly. Only then can I find a way to resolve this once and for all." Mrs. Ngok, increasingly worried for her son, quickly took out her phone and recounted the incident to Mr. Fung. Glancing briefly at the phone, still retaining some residual spiritual energy, Mr. Fung immediately called his daughter to come and open the trash folder containing the images of the 3 ghosts, which hadn't been completely deleted. After showing them to Mrs. Ngok, he continued solemnly, "Look here, even though you said you deleted them, these images are still here. The spirit is still lingering around your son. Only when these images are completely gone and a proper apology ceremony is performed, may the spirit understand and forgive your son. If not, his life will be in danger." With that, Mr. Fung sipped his tea, waved his fan, and added, "For safety's sake, leave him at my house tonight so I can prepare the apology ceremony. You can rest assured that this will be resolved." He then wrote down a list of necessary offerings for the day and instructed Mrs. Ngok to buy them, emphasizing that nothing should be missing. Mrs. Ngok glanced over the densely written paper, pondered for a moment, and finally agreed to leave her son at Mr. Fung's house. Before rushing out to buy the offerings, she reassured her son and made plans to bring him home the following day. As Mrs. Ngok left Mr. Fung's house, a Honda car suddenly sped against the traffic down the alley and stopped right in front of Mr. Fung's door. Mrs. Ngok recognized Mrs. Men, a 19-year-old young man, and Trung sitting between them. "Mr. Fung, please help check what's wrong with my son. We found him lying in the bushes this morning. When he woke up, he seemed dazed." Mr. Fung, who hadn't had a chance to eat or drink, heard Mrs. Main's pleading voice from outside the door, tears streaming down her face out of concern for her son. Moved by her distress, he walked over to where Trung was being supported by his younger brother, looking almost lifeless with his pale face, lips tinged with purple, and vacant eyes. Mr. Fung carefully observed Trunk's spiritual energy for a while, then shook his head and turned to Mrs. Min with a mix of sympathy and admonishment. "Why did it have to come to this? Your son has lost 2 souls and 3 fates. Look at him now. He's practically like a walking corpse. Why didn't you bring him here earlier before things got this serious? I'm not sure I can help him now. Mr. Fung, please, I know you have a way to help my son. Besides you, I have no one else to turn to in this area. Please help my son. I will pay whatever amount you need. Mrs. Min pleaded desperately. Observing Mrs. Min's pale and deeply sunken eyes, Mr. Fung guessed she had stayed up all night searching for her son, only to find him in such a disturbed state. He looked at Trung contemplatively for a long time. At 65 years old, Mr. Fung had never encountered such a case during his years as a spiritual healer. Helping homeowners with rituals, fortune-telling, and spiritual protections was within his expertise, but restoring lost souls was beyond his experience. However, seeing Mrs. Min in such distress and feeling compelled by his profession as a spiritual healer, he reluctantly agreed to help. All right, please don't worry like this. It's not good for you. Stand up. I will try my best to find the lost souls for your son. Whether I succeed or not, we'll see what fate has in store for him. You can go home now. Leave him with me tonight. Come back tomorrow, Mr. Fung said with a mix of assurance and resignation. Mrs. Min, feeling both relieved and anxious, thought it was worth a try. She started to kneel down to take out her wallet to pay, but Mr. Fung stopped her. Please wait. Stand up. I haven't done anything yet for your son. Go home now and wait patiently. Don't worry too much, Mr. Fung insisted kindly. Mrs. Min stood up with a sigh, looked at her son, lost and vacant, for a moment, then departed in disappointment. Tuin, sitting nearby, felt a mix of fear and concern, seeing his friend in such a state, silently observing the entire conversation. Once Mrs. Min and her son left, he nervously turned to Mr. Fung, feeling exhausted and worried. Sir, do you think my friend might end up like that too? I'm scared. Please find a way to help him, Tuin asked anxiously. Mr. Fung listened to Tuin's words but didn't respond, quietly stepping into the back of the house. A moment later, his daughter brought a simple meal and invited Tuin to eat while she guided Trung into their family altar room for his treatment. That evening, in the dimly lit incense-smoked altar room, Mr. Fung sat solemnly amidst the family gods and ancestors, reciting prayers and offerings. Tuin and Trung were also present. Trung sat dazedly, his gaze unfocused and emotionless, while Tuin sat nervously, trembling and scanning around as if expecting someone to suddenly appear and grab him. After finishing the prayers, Mr. Fung stood up and approached the prepared altar. Next to it were 2 paper effigies wrapped in red thread with their names inscribed. He held a yellow paper resembling a parchment and began reciting the inscriptions on it for a few minutes. Tuin sat silently, listening attentively, but unable to comprehend the content of Mr. Fung's recitation. After the supplication ended, the temperature in the room inexplicably dropped, causing Tuin to shiver and huddle up for warmth. Mr. Fung sensed something and took a deep breath before exhaling onto the 2 candles on the altar. A large flame erupted, illuminating the entire room and restoring the temperature to normal. Sensing a presence, Mr. Fung turned back to sit in front of Tuin and Trung. Suddenly, Trung's body jerked uncontrollably, and he growled incoherently. Quickly retrieving 2 magically enchanted willow leaves from his pocket, Mr. Fung held them between his fingers and gently placed them across Trung's closed eyes. In an instant, a faint golden light emitted from Mr. Fung's eyes as he stared directly at Trung, sensing behind him a grotesque, twisted figure of a specter with glowing green eyes and menacingly sharp teeth, staring back at him intently. Knowing that these 3 specters were destined for a dreadful fate, Mr. Fung recited a mantra to open a dialogue with them, a task he had never attempted before. You 3, in life you committed unspeakable acts against moral norms. In death, you failed to repent, evading the underworld's judgment, thereby accumulating grievous karma. How did your malicious intentions harm the mortal realm? Speak quickly, or I will banish your souls forever from the cycle of reincarnation, Mr. Fung demanded sternly. One of the specters, enraged, gnashed its teeth and began recounting its deeds to Mr. Fung. After hearing their explanations, the specter glared at him and replied. Mr. Fung listened to Tuin's words but didn't respond, quietly stepping into the back of the house. A moment later, his daughter brought a simple meal and invited Tuin to eat, while she guided Trong into their family altar room for his treatment. That evening, in the dimly lit incense-smoked altar room, Mr. Fung sat solemnly amidst the family gods and ancestors, reciting prayers and offerings. Tuin and Trong were also present. Trong sat dazedly, his gaze unfocused and emotionless, while Tuin sat nervously, trembling and scanning around as if expecting someone to suddenly appear and grab him. After finishing the prayers, Mr. Fung stood up and approached the prepared altar. Next to it were 2 paper effigies wrapped in red thread with their names inscribed. He held a yellow paper resembling a parchment and began reciting the inscriptions on it for a few minutes. Tuin sat silently, listening attentively but unable to comprehend the content of Mr. Fung's recitation. After the supplication ended, the temperature in the room inexplicably dropped, causing Tuin to shiver and huddle up for warmth. Mr. Fung sensed something and took a deep breath before exhaling onto the 2 candles on the altar. A large flame erupted, illuminating the entire room and restoring the temperature to normal. Sensing a presence, Mr. Fung turned back to sit in front of Tuin and Trong. Suddenly, Trong's body jerked uncontrollably, and he growled incoherently. Quickly retrieving 2 magically enchanted willow leaves from his pocket, Mr. Fung held them between his fingers and gently placed them across closed eyes. In an instant, a faint golden light emitted from Mr. Fung's eyes as he stared directly at Trong, sensing behind him a grotesque, twisted figure of a specter with glowing green eyes and menacingly sharp teeth, staring back at him intently. Knowing that these 3 specters were destined for a dreadful fate, Mr. Fung recited a mantra to open a dialogue with them, a task he had never attempted before. You 3, in life you committed unspeakable acts against moral norms. In death, you failed to repent, evading the underworld's judgment, thereby accumulating grievous karma. How did your malicious intentions harm the mortal realm? Speak quickly, or I will banish your souls forever from the cycle of reincarnation, Mr. Fung demanded sternly. One of the specters, enraged, gnashed its teeth and began recounting its deeds to Mr. Fung. After hearing their explanations, the specter glared at him and replied, "Who are you to interfere in our affairs? You know already that it was these 2 who offended us. They dared to intrude where we were reaping benefits. As for you, heed my warning and stay away, or you will share the same fate as these 2. While these 2 men may have transgressed against you, it does not mean you have the right to seize anyone's soul. Your karmic consequences grow larger, making it harder for you to achieve rebirth. Therefore, on behalf of these 2 men, I offer a humble offering and these 2 paper effigies as a gesture of apology. Please forgive them. Regarding this man's lost soul, I beseech you to return it to him. Do not continue to burden yourself with heavy karma." Upon hearing this, one specter agreed while the other refused the apology. Suddenly, one specter glided through Trong's body and hovered before Mr. Fung, laughing eerily. "So you want to reclaim this man's soul, huh? Fine, capture me, and I will return his soul to you." With that, the specter swiftly darted out of the room, leaving Mr. Fung astonished. However, as if anticipating this, a net woven from multicolored threads hung unexpectedly from the door, a sacred artifact Mr. Fung had requested from the temple earlier. As the specter attempted to pass through the door, it was unexpectedly ensnared by the net's supernatural force, causing its spiritual essence to disperse partially. Enraged and in pain, its eyes turned red, and seeing no reaction from Mr. Fung, it quickly lunged toward him in an attempt to harm him. Swiftly reacting, Mr. Fung grabbed two talismans from the table and swiftly reversed their powers against the specter. Affected by the talismans, Mr. Fung immediately began chanting a mantra faster and faster. As he finished his chant, the two talismans on the specter burst into flames, emitting a dense smoke. Gradually, the spiritual energy within the specter dissipated into the void. In the blink of an eye, the specter's ethereal image faded away, signifying its vanquishment. Sealing the bamboo tube he had prepared earlier, Mr. Fung turned to the remaining two specters and spoke sternly. "Now it's your turn. Will you speak up, or do you want me to take stronger measures?" The two specters, realizing they were no match for Mr. Fung, became fearful and pleaded, "Master, please forgive us. We acted out of anger and followed these two momentarily. As for the young man's lost soul, it was the other specter who took it, not us. We did not aid in its theft." "If that's the case, then you must know where the soul of the boy is hidden. Quickly, tell me where to find it," Mr. Fung demanded. The two specters agreed and immediately possessed Trung's body. That same night, they led Mr. Fung to a desolate land not far away. Scattered around were a few old and new graves amidst thick foliage. In the middle of this land stood a tall betel nut tree, barren of fruit. The specters within Trung's body pointed towards the tree and said that his soul was there. Mr. Fung carefully observed the tree and then applied a talisman to its trunk. He pressed his fingers on it and recited a mantra. Suddenly, the tree trunk shook violently. At the top of the tree, a faint figure resembling Trung slowly descended until it completely merged into the talisman. However, only one soul was retrieved. The other part of the soul was nowhere to be found. Angered, Mr. Fung turned sharply to the two specters and rebuked, "You dare play games with me? Why is there only a part of the soul? Where is the rest?" We don't know." The specters replied, "Before the other specter took him away, it left only a part of this man's soul here. We truly don't know where the rest is. Please forgive us." Mr. Fung listened to the words of the two specters and sensed no deceit. He sighed deeply, took out a bamboo tube, and communicated with the imprisoned spirit of the young man. However, the spirit preferred destruction over revealing where Trung's remaining soul was hidden. Mr. Fung was furious and contemplated dispelling the spirit entirely. But upon reflection, he decided to bring it back for transformation. After all, he believed in filial piety and couldn't bring himself to extinguish the life of a wandering soul lost on the wrong path. He then advised the two specters to abandon their grudges and seek refuge in a temple where monks could offer salvation, possibly allowing them a chance for reincarnation, instead of enduring the restless existence of wandering spirits in the mortal realm. The specters agreed to follow his advice and vowed not to haunt Trung and Tuyen any longer. Upon returning home, Mr. Fung performed a ritual to contain the spirits of the two specters in the bamboo tube, intending to bring them to the temple the next day for further assistance from the monks. As promised, the next morning, both families arrived at Mr. Fung's house to escort the two brothers home. Tuyen's complexion had returned to normal, no longer shadowed and pale as the day before. Trung showed some slight improvement in his demeanor, although his reactions and speech were somewhat slower than before. After Mr. Fung explained the situation to Mrs. Men, she was deeply saddened. Nevertheless, she cherished her son's regained life, knowing it was far better than watching him fade away day by day. Before leaving, both families generously compensated Mr. Fung with a substantial sum of money, although he himself was not particularly concerned. He only took enough to buy candles, incense, and some offerings, and also gave a few protective talismans to the two women to ward off misfortune during the 7th lunar month. Both women thanked him sincerely and took their sons back home. Mr. Fung bid farewell to the families at the door with a smile on his face. though his eyes betrayed a hint of sorrow for not being able to fully restore Trung. He stood silently, watching as the guests moved along the dusty road under the bright morning sun and gentle breeze. End of story.